When you reach your late 60s and early 70s, nobody prepares you for how strange life begins to feel. People warn you about retirement money. They warn you about cholesterol, blood pressure, medications, and doctor visits. But very few people sit down and tell you the truth about what really changes between 65 and 75. And I'll tell you something from my own life, friends. This is not the decade when life becomes impossible. It's the decade when life becomes heavier. Little things, ordinary things, things that never used to cost you a second thought, suddenly ask something from you. A little more energy, a little more courage, a little more patience. And if you don't understand what's happening, you begin blaming yourself for changes that are actually happening to almost everybody your age. That's why now I want to talk with you about 6 challenges that hit many people in these years. Not to depress you, quite the opposite. I want you to understand them before they quietly steal pieces of your life without permission. Because once you understand what's happening, you can fight back gently. Not with force, not with denial, but with awareness. The first challenge is sameness. Now this one sneaks up on people. Most folks don't even realize it's happening. One day, you notice you've been driving the same roads for months, eating the same meals, watching the same television programs, sitting in the same chair every evening while the days blur together like somebody photocopied your life over and over again. I went through this myself after I turned 70. I had a diner I loved. Same corner booth every Tuesday morning, same eggs, same coffee, same waitress calling me Han. At first, it felt comforting, familiar, safe. But after a while, I noticed something uncomfortable. My world was shrinking without asking my permission. My brain wasn't waking up anymore. I wasn't curious. I wasn't interested. Days stopped feeling memorable. And let me tell you something important, friends. The brain gets old faster when nothing surprises it anymore. People think staying sharp means crossword puzzles and vitamins. Those things are fine, but what really keeps the mind alive is novelty. Small surprises. Tiny moments where your brain has to pay attention again. One afternoon, I drove 3 streets farther than usual and found a little park I'd never noticed before. Sat there watching 2 boys play basketball while an old woman fed birds from a paper bag. Nothing extraordinary happened, but when I got home that evening, I realized something. I remembered the day clearly. That's what novelty does. It wakes the mind up. So now I tell older people this everywhere I go. Once a week, do one unfamiliar thing. Nothing dramatic. You don't need to jump out of airplanes at 73 years old. Just walk a different street. Read a different author. Try a restaurant on the other side of town. Sit on a different bench in the park. The aging brain doesn't need excitement nearly as much as it needs interruption. Because when every day looks identical, the mind slowly stops recording life. And that, my friends, is a dangerous way to grow old. The second challenge is the one nobody likes talking about because it feels embarrassing. It's the shrinking of your social world. Not all at once, slowly, quietly. At first, you stop making phone calls because you feel tired. Then you stop accepting invitations because staying home sounds easier. Then months pass and you realize the phone barely rings anymore. I've watched this happen to good men, strong men, men who spent 40 years working around people every single day, suddenly sitting alone in silence, wondering where everybody went. But here's the truth nobody explains properly. Often the people didn't disappear first. The impulse disappeared first. The desire to reach outward gets softer as we age. That's why loneliness becomes so dangerous after 65. It isn't only about being alone, it's about slowly losing the instinct to reconnect. I remember after my wife passed, there were afternoons where I could hear laughter outside from neighbors on their porches, and I would think to myself, maybe I should walk over there. But then another voice would whisper, maybe tomorrow. That little sentence can steal years from a person. Maybe tomorrow, then tomorrow becomes 6 months. Now, listen carefully, because this matters. At our age, you do not need dozens of friends. You do not need a busy social calendar. You simply need regular human contact, tiny, repeated connections. The cashier who recognizes your face, the neighbor who waves while taking out the trash, the barber who asks how your week went. These small interactions are more important than pride allows us to admit. Human beings are social creatures until the very end. And I'll tell you another thing I learned the hard way. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Solitude can be beautiful. Some mornings I sit by the window with my coffee and the silence feels rich and peaceful. That's solitude. But loneliness feels empty, heavy, like the walls are slowly moving inward. Older people must learn the difference. One feeds the spirit, the other slowly starves it. So, if you're listening and you realize you haven't spoken to another person in 2 or 3 days, don't ignore that. Don't wait for motivation to magically return. Action comes first now, not feeling. Sometimes at 72, you have to put your shoes on before the desire arrives. And strangely enough, once you get out there, the desire often follows behind you. Now, the third challenge may be the hardest one of all because it attacks your pride. It's learning how to receive help. Most of our generation was taught that strength meant handling things alone. We raised children, paid bills, worked jobs we hated, cared for sick parents, survived losses nobody even knows about. We became experts at carrying weight quietly. But somewhere after 70, life starts asking a painful question. Can you let someone help you without feeling ashamed? That's not easy. I remember slipping my kitchen one winter morning. Didn't break anything, thankfully. But I sat there on the cold floor longer than I'd like to admit, and my first instinct wasn't to call somebody. My first instinct was to hide it. Isn't that strange? Even alone on the floor, many older people are still protecting everyone else from their own reality. We don't want to become burdens. We don't want our children worrying. We don't want neighbors seeing weakness. But friends, refusing help does not preserve dignity nearly as much as people think it does. Sometimes it only delays disaster. I knew a man named Walter, proud fellow, retired electrician, tough as nails, wouldn't let anybody mow his lawn even after his breathing got bad, wouldn't use a cane, wouldn't ask his daughter for rides to appointments, kept saying, "I'm fine." You know what happened? One bad fall, hospital, rehab. Lost almost all independence in 6 months because he waited too long to accept small support. That changed me deeply. I began realizing something important. Asking for help early is not surrender. It's strategy. Smart aging is not about proving you still can do everything alone. Smart aging is preserving energy for what matters most. And let me tell you something else many seniors need to hear. People who love you often want to help more than you allow them to. Sometimes when you refuse every offer, you are not protecting them. You are shutting them out of loving you. That took me years to understand. There's another challenge that sneaks into these years so quietly you barely notice it until your world starts getting smaller. I'm talking about the body's hesitation, not weakness exactly. Hesitation, that tiny pause before getting up from a chair. That moment at the bottom of the stairs where you suddenly calculate whether the trip is worth it. That grocery bag you carried easily for 30 years, now feeling strangely heavier than it should. Young people think aging happens like a lightning strike, but most of the time it arrives like fog, slow, quiet, almost polite. I remember standing in my garage one afternoon staring at a ladder I had climbed 1,000 times before, and for the first time in my life, my body asked me a question before moving. Are we sure about this? That shook me. Not because I couldn't climb the ladder, but because the automatic confidence was gone. And here's what I want older folks listening to understand. Many times the body doesn't stop first. The willingness stops first. You avoid one difficult movement, then another, then another. And slowly, the body learns smaller living. That's how people shrink without realizing it. They stop reaching high shelves, stop taking walks, stop bending down, stop carrying things, and after enough months pass, the muscles listen. I started fighting this in very small ways. Nothing heroic. Every morning I began walking a little farther down my block than I felt like walking. Some mornings my knees complained the whole time. But the goal wasn't athleticism. The goal was conversation with my body. I wanted my nervous system to remember that movement was still part of life, and I learned something powerful. Older bodies respond better to consistency than intensity. You don't need to punish yourself in a gym at 74 years old, but you do need to keep telling your body, we're still participating in life. Because once the brain decides movement is no longer necessary, the decline speeds up quietly in the background. The fifth challenge is one people rarely admit out loud. It's grief that never fully leaves. By the time you reach your 70s, almost everybody is carrying invisible absences. A brother gone, a spouse gone, old friends gone, parents long gone. Even the places you loved disappear. Restaurants close, neighborhoods change, houses get sold. Sometimes you drive through a street you once knew by heart and feel like a stranger in your own memories. That kind of grief is difficult because it doesn't arrive dramatically anymore. It becomes woven into ordinary life. You're pouring coffee and suddenly remember somebody who used to sit across from you. You hear a song in a grocery store and your chest tightens for 10 seconds before you continue shopping like nothing happened. Younger people often think grief is something you finish, but older people know better. Grief changes shape. It becomes quieter, but it stays. I still catch myself reaching for the phone to call people who have been gone for years. Isn't that something? The mind remembers love faster than reality sometimes. And I think one reason these years feel emotionally heavy is because older people are grieving constantly while pretending they aren't. We become very skilled at functioning while carrying sadness. But I'll tell you what helped me. I stopped treating grief like an enemy. I stopped asking, why can't I get over this? And started asking, what if remembering is part of loving? That changed everything for me. Missing people means they mattered. Feeling sadness means your heart is still alive. The danger comes when grief hardens into withdrawal. That's when people stop living before life is actually over. So, if you've lost people, and I know many listening have, please hear me carefully. Do not build a shrine out of your pain and move into it permanently. Carry your memories with tenderness. Yes, speak their names, tell stories about them. But keep living too. Keep laughing too. The people we loved would not want us sitting in dark rooms, waiting to join them. Life still asks something from us while we're here. And now we come to the sixth challenge, maybe the deepest one of all. It's the question of purpose after the old identities fade away. This one hits people harder than they expect, especially good, hard-working people. For 50 years, you knew who you were because somebody needed you. You were the provider, the mother, the boss, the worker, the problem solver, the caretaker. Every morning had instructions attached to it. Then one day the children are grown. The career is over, the schedules disappear, and suddenly you wake up asking a frightening question, who am I now? A lot of older people become depressed without realizing this is the real wound underneath everything else. It isn't simply aging, it's the loss of role. I went through this myself after retirement. For the first year, I kept acting like I was on vacation, but eventually vacation turns into emptiness if there's no deeper meaning underneath it. I remember sitting in my living room one afternoon thinking, nobody really needs me today. That sentence can become dangerous if you repeat it long enough. But age taught me something beautiful too. Maybe the final stage of life is not about being needed by the world every minute. Maybe it's about finally meeting yourself underneath all the roles you spent decades performing. That takes time and honesty. Some people never do it because they stay busy distracting themselves until the end. But if you sit quietly long enough, eventually you begin discovering what still brings you alive. Not productivity, not usefulness, aliveness. Maybe it's gardening. Maybe it's painting little birds nobody will ever buy. Maybe it's reading history books. Maybe it's helping one lonely neighbor feel seen. Maybe it's simply learning how to enjoy your own company without guilt. There's wisdom in that, real wisdom. The world teaches young people to build identity through achievement. Old age teaches something entirely different. It teaches identity through presence, through attention, through appreciating what remains instead of mourning only what disappeared. And after all these years, here's what I honestly believe. The people who age with the most peace are not necessarily the healthiest or richest. They're the people who learn softness without surrender. They stop fighting reality every morning. They adapt. They become gentler with themselves. They stop measuring their worth by speed, productivity, or independence alone. They learn how to receive joy in smaller forms. A warm cup of coffee, a phone call from a grandchild, sunlight through a kitchen window, a quiet walk at dusk. These things sound small when you're young. Later in life, they become enormous. So, if you're somewhere between 65 and 75, or even older than that, I want you to remember something before we part ways. You are not failing because life feels heavier now. You are carrying a brain and body that simply require more intention than they once did. That's not weakness. That's human aging. And despite all the losses these years can bring, there is still deep beauty available to you. There is still curiosity left, still connection left, still laughter left, still purpose left. Maybe not in the loud, ambitious way the world celebrates when we're young, but in a quieter, truer way. Thank you for spending this time with me. I really mean that. And if something in these words stayed with you, hold on to it this week. Take the walk, make the phone call, try the unfamiliar thing. Let somebody help you. Be a little kinder to yourself than you were yesterday. We've all come a long way to get here. Take care of yourself out there, my friends. I'll see you again soon.